Liz Cheney is down, but not out, and already she is looking ahead. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is another declaration of truth from your host, Terry A. Hurlbut. Representative Liz Cheney, the rhino from Wyoming, will not return to her at-large seat in the House of Representatives next term. Her prime challenger, Harriet Hageman, beat her soundly yesterday. But did you really think this was over? Huh? Didn't I tell you that she was really running for president? In fact, I told you she's been running for president all the time. And last night she proved that in her concession speech. Do you know what famous name she dropped? The name of the Republican who lost a congressional and a Senate race, and then he won the big one 2 years later. And you guessed that name, Abraham Lincoln. Lots to unpack here, but before we start, I do want to shout out to the prime sponsor of this channel, which is Conservative News and Views. Link in the description. Be sure to check out the awesome CNAV Store. Scroll down near the bottom for that link. You will find lots of good merchandise there, especially this t-shirt that I have chosen for today, which reads, Rhino Hunting. That's the idea. We are on the hunt, and last night we bagged the big one. Or did we? I think we just wounded her. She'll recover and come back as even bigger and more dangerous game. Decision Desk Headquarters is the permanent national election results pool. They called the race at 7:27 p.m. Wyoming time, which, in case you didn't know it, is Mountain Time. That's a scant 27 minutes after polls closed. I have a link in the description to their tweet that they put out when they called the race. And I have another link in the description to the results page for the August 16th primaries in Wyoming and in Alaska. At 4:46 a.m. Wyoming time, with 99% of precincts reporting, Harriet Hageman led with 66 1/3% of the vote. Liz Cheney came in a distant second at just less than 29%. The other three challengers are not worth mentioning. None of them got as much as 2 2/3% of the vote. Now, here's something interesting. When Decision Desk called the race, Harriet Hageman had slightly less than 60% of the vote. Now, obviously, her lead had widened by the time I checked this morning. The Democratic results raise a serious question of whether any Democrats crossed over just to vote for Liz Cheney. Or if they did, the incumbent cannot have gotten very many votes. With more than 99% of precincts reporting, Lynette Graybull, and by the way, she's Native American, so those two words of the name do go together exactly as I just pronounced them, finished with just under 62.5% of the vote. Her nearest challenger, Megan Jensen, got just under 25.25%. But here's the thing. No more than 7,202 people voted in that primary. Now, stack that against 170,409 people voting in the Republican primary. Now, Whiskey Tango Foxtrot, the Wyoming Secretary of State, in the last week before the primary, estimated that 10,000 Democrats switched parties. But why? And isn't that a big chunk out of primary participation? Now, did those people really cross over to vote in the Republican primary? I'm not so sure about that. I think they genuinely wanted to start voting Republican right away. Now, when I say that, I'm going to give credit where credit is due. I want to talk about the Democratic candidate. Lynette Graybull is not an empty suit. If this were Bill Clinton's first presidential race in 1992, Ms. Graybull could give Harriet Hageman a serious run for her money. And she still might. Harriet Hageman, pay attention. Don't let Lynette Graybull outflank you. She's actually a very lovely person. And she's got some genuine, meaty, you gotta think about them issues to run on. You're telling me that 10,000 Democrats switched parties to vote for a middle-aged, slightly wrinkled pale-face like Liz Cheney instead of a photogenic and very formidable candidate like that? I don't think so. I think they switched permanently. In any case, Trump carried Wyoming with 70% of the vote in 2020. Now, in contrast, the 170+ thousand Republican primary voters represent 96% of the total primary vote yesterday. Indeed, fewer Democrats voted in their own primary than allegedly switched parties before it. So, thousands of Democrats either stayed home in despair or, as I said, they switched permanently. Lynette, I think in any other political climate, you'd be a winner. But not this time. Tip O'Neill is wrong. All politics is not local. Not all the time. Now, let's get back to Liz Cheney. She conceded the race barely an hour after the polls closed. I have a link in the description to a nearly half-hour video containing her speech. And you have got to hear it to believe it. She actually had the effrontery to compare herself with Abraham Lincoln. Listen to this. The great original champion of our party, Abraham Lincoln, was defeated in elections for the Senate and the House before he won the most important election of all. Lincoln ultimately prevailed. He saved our union and he defined our obligation as Americans for all of history. Unquote, Liz Cheney. This is the most important thing to take away from her speech. Her reasons for continuing to support bills of attainder and expost facto laws are incidental. Well, almost incidental. But she actually plans to repeat the triumph of Abraham Lincoln, who did lose House and Senate races before becoming president. Before I go any further, I want to shout out to a sponsor who can really help you through the economic storms to come. That sponsor is oursilverlines.com. Do you feel like you're working harder for your money just to get by? You are not alone. The fluctuating economy, employment issues, and unexpected changes in life have left many families struggling over the past few years. Collecting gold and silver can help shield you against many of these challenges. But if you're like me many years ago, you don't know how or where to start. Our Silver Lines helps by connecting you with thousands of members who are learning the secrets to creating and protecting true wealth by collecting precious metals. Whether you just want to collect rare and unique coins or take advantage of the business opportunities that company provides, they can help you learn to live an exceptional life. Visit oursilverlines.com to learn how you can build a legacy for your future. Now, back to that concession speech that Liz Cheney made. Of course, she insists that Donald Trump is the greatest threat to democracy. She rejects absolutely everything Trump says as a lie. In her world, Democrats won the election of 2020 fair and square, and also in the Liz Cheney world, the FBI were merely doing their jobs in the Trump raid. In line with this, she pledged or threatened to do whatever it takes to make sure Trump never again serves as president. Now, hold the phone. It's been a while since I talked about bills of attainder and expost facto laws. So I thought I'd review the definitions. A bill of attainder is a law declaring a particular person to be an outlaw. Literally, it's what happens when the legislature singles out a person or persons for punishment. Trial in a bill of attainder case, if you can call it that, takes place in the legislature itself. A committee holds parliamentary hearings and returns the equivalent of a true bill of indictment. Then the full chamber will take up the bill as with other bills. An ex post facto law prescribes punishment for conduct prior to its passage. By definition, it is retroactive. Under any regime that allows that kind of thing, one cannot be sure that the legislature will not hold him guilty for conduct that the legislature might even have favored at the time. Now, in this case, the January 6th committee is taking the place of a court of preliminary hearing. And as you will see, Liz Cheney still believes that that committee can function. But the only way it will function enough to do the work she wants it to do is if Democrats retain the House and Senate at midterms. And that has less than a snowball's chance at HE double hockey sticks of happening. She's still sane enough to know it, so her rhetoric rings hollow. In her concession speech, Liz Cheney makes clear what her next steps will be. She will throw herself into the work of the January 6th committee. How many more hearings that committee will hold? No one can guess. But listen to this. Our nation is barreling once again toward crisis, lawlessness, and violence, unquote Liz Cheney. But she isn't talking about the real and constant violence in America's inner cities. Nor does she comment on prosecuting attorneys who won't prosecute, presumably because a thief is an irregular wealth redistribution agent, and maybe also because a murderer is an irregular summary executioner, and his victim deserved to die in the name of social justice. None of that concerns or phases Liz Cheney. Oh no, she paints the lurid picture of Trump leading a putsch to overthrow Biden's government. Or maybe she wants people to fear a night of long knives if Trump should win re-election. One can scarcely imagine whose vote she is trying to get, unless she intends to seek the Democratic presidential nomination. After all, she has just called Trump the equivalent of Juan Perón, the dictator of Argentina. And when she does that, she calls more than half of American voters the equivalent of Peronistas. And to reinforce the point, if, as she charges, Trump is trying to provoke violence and threats of violence, then she accuses more than half the country of being ready to do violence. Now that can only mean she would like to arrest and imprison that half under a massive bill of attainder. Robert Costa of CBS News carried this interview, providing further evidence that Liz Cheney is running for president. It was when she was standing in line to vote, and I have a link in the tweet in the description. He quotes her as saying, "Win or lose, this is the beginning of the battle for democracy." Now, her rhetoric and her declaration of targets make clear that she is the real threat to our republic. I say republic because democracy is two wolves and a lamb voting on once for dinner. Therefore, we must do whatever it takes to ensure that Liz Cheney never gets anywhere near the Oval Office. Now, that shouldn't be too difficult. Her pathways to the Oval Office are narrow and have many chasms that she would have to jump. But that's not enough to close them. Close those pathways. So I'm not going to make the mistake so many of my colleagues are now making. I'm not going to predict that she'll have to move back in with her father or anything that's silly. I've got my eyes on you, Lizzie, baby. I'm going to watch you like a hawk. And I will sound the alarm when I have to. That Abraham Lincoln reference might be brass hat idiotic, but I take it as a warning, and I take it very seriously. And hey, Liz Cheney, if you think I've insulted you without justice or in any way treated you unfairly, leave a comment. While I'm at it, Lynette Greenville, if you'd like to weigh in on how you can beat Harriet Hagman anyway, if you think you can, and about those issues I know you're working on, about tribal jurisdiction and the trafficking of Native American girls, well, maybe you should leave a comment. I'd be glad to hear it. And Harriet Hagman, I think my viewers would love to hear how you are going to address the issues that your opponent has already said she's going to raise. I really think President Trump would want to know that too. Link in the description to the article, to the Decision Desk results page and tweet calling the race, to the video carrying Liz Cheney's concession speech, to Robert Costa's tweet, and to Conservative News and Views. I've also left links to the awesome CNAV Store and to oursilverlines.com, as I also mentioned. And if you like what you've heard, you can like this video. And on the end screen, I'm going to leave a subscribe link and definitely links to the concession speech and earlier videos about my take on Liz Cheney. This is Terry A. Hurlbut delivering another declaration of truth and reminding you to let the truth set you free.